Hey y'all, welcome to Tristan Circa 89, where I obsess over pop culture so you don't have to. So I want to get on here today and talk about my predictions for Scream 6 and beyond. Scream 5 is doing pretty well in the box office, and it looks like we might just get a Scream 6 and possibly even a Scream 7 that revolves around the Carpenter sisters. And of course, we still have the Meeks twins surviving as well. So I want to talk about where I kind of see each of these characters going and what the possible plots could be for Screams 6 and 7. So let's just get right into it. First, let me start off by saying I feel like Sydney and Gail's stories are done. If we never see those characters again, I'm happy with what we got in Scream 5, especially because, Sydney is in a good place in her life. She's married, she has kids. I think it is time to let Sydney Prescott have a happy ending. And besides, for franchise longevity, we have to move away from Sydney. We have to move away from Gail. R.I.P. Dewey, we will miss you, but we have to move away from the core three. So I wanted to say that up front. I think Sydney Prescott's story is done. I feel like Gail's story is done too. Now I wouldn't be surprised if Courtney Cox is willing. I wouldn't be surprised if we see Gail show up or make a cameo in future films, just because that's the nature of who Gail Weathers is. Every time these killings go down, she's going to be somewhere in the mix. So, Courtney Cox willing, if she, wants to come back and to do a cameo as Gail, I think that would be great. But I feel like their stories are kind of wrapped up, and I'm satisfied with where they ended. So let's talk about our Scream 6 cast. We have Melissa Barrera portraying Sam Carpenter. We have Jenna Ortega portraying Tara Carpenter. We have Mason Gooding portraying Chad Meeks. And we have Jasmine Savoy Brown portraying Mindy Meeks. So I feel like we have a pretty good, strong group of characters to lead us into Scream 6. As far as we know right now, Sam Carpenter is our new final girl. She's also the daughter of Billy Loomis. I think that is a very interesting concept to have the interesting concept for the Scream franchise to have the daughter of Billy Loomis seemingly be the new lead. And we see in Scream 5 she has some mental health issues. She hallucinates seeing Billy, and he sort of serves as this sort of guide to her. I really do think they're sort of setting us up to see kind of her, unraveling slowly, or at least a little bit more in future films. Especially because it'll be interesting to see how the Stab fandom reacts to finding out that the new lead of the Stab franchise is the daughter of the original killer. I could see the fans being split on that decision. I could see it now. Hashtag not my final girl. I feel like the toxic fandom commentary could be extended. You can address other aspects of toxic fandom. So like that hashtag not my final girl. I could totally see that being done to Sam in future stories. So I really want to see how she deals with that, the emotional and mental impact that has on her. She's already in a fragile place. She's trying her best to survive and persist, but she's in a fragile place. So having thousands of people come after her just because of who her dad is, having thousands of people try to convince her that she's bad just because of who her dad is, I think that'll be a really interesting story for her. So that's what I hope to see in future movies. I want to see her struggle with that dark side of her. We got a glimpse of it in this film. I want to see that expanded on in future films. Now, when it comes to Tara Carpenter, I feel like she more so fits into the traditional idea of what a final girl is. She's young, pure, strong, a fighter. She's very much like Sydney Prescott in the first Scream. So I think that's sort of an interesting dynamic we have with the two sisters. We have one who kind of comes from this darkness and represents darkness, and we also have the younger sister, Tara, who represents light, purity, being a survivor, being good. So I hope future films really kind of explore that dynamic. I think it'd be interesting if they're setting us up for almost this sort of Cain versus Abel type conflict between the Carpenter sisters. I could see at some point that hallucination of Billy sort of telling Sam, like, hey, if you're going to be happy, if the fandom's going to embrace you, you're going to have to kill Tara. I think that would be really interesting. I think it'd be interesting if Tara starts to see how unstable her sister is, and maybe a future killer disguised as her friend or someone plants the idea in her head, like, hey, you might have to be the one to take down your sister because she's on the path to becoming Ghostface, just like her dad. I really want to see that family dynamic, that family drama explored. especially when their mother is thrown in, which I'll talk about her in a little bit. I want to see how that family dynamic is because we get the hints in this movie that it is very jacked up. So you just know with killings going on and things like that, that's just going to exacerbate that fragile dynamic. So I really want to see that played up in future films. And I really am interested in seeing how Tara evolves in future films. Now, Mindy Meeks is our new Randy, or I should say, our new Kirby Reed. She is everything that Kirby Reed was, and I hope that in Scream 6 we get to see another evolution of that. I hope to see her, I can see her being like a podcast host, having her own YouTube channel. Like, I can just really see her being a iconic figure in the Stab fandom. I would really love to see an arc where she's determined to break out of her side character mode and become sort of a main lead. And maybe we could even see the fandom kind of rejecting that, like, no, stay in your place. You're a side character. You're not a final girl. I think that would be really interesting, sort of see that arc with her trying to break out of her side character role. But of course, still offering her commentary, her knowledge to help everyone survive the events of another Ghostface killing. So yeah, I really want her to meet Kirby. Like, I'm really hoping Hayden Panettiere comes back for Scream 6 because I mean, Mindy Meeks and Kirby Reed in a room together, like, the fans will go crazy. So I'm really hoping we see more of her. We see her evolve into her own person, and hopefully we get to see her become more of a lead. Now, Chad Meeks, I feel like he's in an interesting position as well. He is the only male survivor of Scream 5. And I have this weird idea in my head of like, somehow in universe, somebody wants to give Chad a spinoff, a male led spinoff of the Stab films, which, from my understanding, that's never happened. So to have a final boy be the lead, again, toxic fandom. There's some fans who would embrace it, some fans who would be like, no, there's no final boy in the Stab franchise. It's always a final girl. So I think that would be interesting to see maybe killers targeting him because he's a final boy. And again, Stab doesn't have final boys. I also want to see how he reacts to the death of his girlfriend, how he's just reacting to the events around him. He's very different from Dewey, so we'll get to see a different perspective on like the male survivor or the final boy. And I think it would be really interesting to see again a killer target him because he's a final boy and Stab doesn't have final boys. And let me clarify that. Let me be clear. Because obviously Dewey was sort of our final boy, but I feel like he was kind of a side character. He was there to support Sydney, our final girl. So again, to watch the franchise try to truly embrace him as his own final boy and become his own main character, again, toxic fandom wouldn't go for that. So I feel like there's, again, more areas of toxic fandom that could be explored in the story. Now, I am so excited to possibly meet Mr. and Mrs. Carpenter, the parents of Sam and Tara in the next film. Again, we know this family dynamic is all kinds of jacked up. We know that Mr. Carpenter left after he found out that Sam was not his daughter. We know that Mrs. Carpenter is a drunk, she's distant, doesn't seem to care all that much about her kids. We also know that she's a Stab fan. That's established early on in the film. So imagine a Stab fan whose two daughters are final girls or perceived as final girls. I could see her being almost like this stage mom type person who's like pimping her daughters out, especially Tara. And I point out Tara over Sam because Tara has that Sidney Prescott feel to her. She's gonna have a strong connection to her mother. So I could see her wanting to please her mother, wanting to get her mother's approval and love. So I could see Mrs. Carpenter taking advantage of that. And again, pimping Tara out, having her write books, do speaking events, and I could see Sam being more of the rebel. This could even be used to kind of point at Mrs. Carpenter as a Ghostface killer. Maybe she's trying to keep her daughter's fame going. So I'm really excited to see what happens with the parents in future films. So what are your thoughts? Where do you think Scream 6 could go? I'm really excited to get another film. I'm really excited to see what could happen in Scream 7. Maybe that's the theoretical Scream 7 could be the culmination of that, like I mentioned earlier, Cain versus Abel type conflict between Sam and Tara. Maybe at the end of Scream 6, Mrs. Carpenter is murdered. Maybe both parents are murdered, and Tara thinks Sam did it. And so she's like, okay, I have to take down my sister because she's now Ghostface. She's now just like her father. So again, what are your predictions? What do you think could happen? Let me know. Again, this is Tristan Circa 89, and I obsess over pop culture so you don't have to.